The Boreal Rim Protocol. What's hiding inside the Aurora Borealis? Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. We are a species drawn to light. From the first fire that pushed back the primordial dark to the sprawling neon cities that paint over the night sky, we find comfort in illumination. We seek it out. We believe, on a fundamental level, that light means safety, that it means clarity, that it means truth. The wild places of our world, the vast, untamed expanses, offer a different kind of light. The unfiltered brilliance of the sun, the stark, silver-blue glow of the moon on snow. And, for those willing to travel to the very edges of the map, the most spectacular light show on Earth, the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights. We are taught that nature, in its rawest form, is a thing of beauty, a spectacle to be revered. But the protocols of the wilderness are not written by us. They are ancient and different, and sometimes they are deeply, fundamentally wrong. What happens when the light is not a promise of safety, but a warning? What happens when the most beautiful phenomenon in our sky becomes a canvas for something alien, something malevolent? What happens when the beauty is a lie, a lure for a trap as old as the stars themselves? Tonight, we have a story from a man who went seeking the light and found only a hungry darkness wearing a beautiful mask. It's a story from a place called Boreal Rim National Park. A story about the night the sky went mad. A story about the northern lights that were the wrong colors. And whispered. Our account begins with a man named Alex. And to be clear, Alex was not some wide-eyed amateur stumbling into a situation beyond his grasp. He was in his late 30s, and he made his living as a landscape photographer. For more than a decade, his work had taken him to the quiet, forgotten corners of the world. He was a veteran of the backcountry. He had navigated the perpetually misty highlands of Scotland, his boots sinking into rain-soaked peat. He had weathered freak blizzards in the high passes of the Rockies, the world reduced to a maelstrom of white. He had felt the profound, soul-deep silence of the Atacama Desert at midnight, under a sky so clear it felt like a physical weight. Alex understood the wilderness. He respected its power, its indifference, its unwritten rules. He knew how to prepare, how to read the weather, how to feel the subtle shift in the air that signals a coming storm. He believed he knew the protocols. His work was more than a job, it was a calling. And his particular obsession, the siren song that pulled him to these remote places, was the art of capturing celestial phenomena. He had a portfolio filled with breathtaking images of meteor showers streaking over silent canyons, of solar eclipses turning day into an eerie twilight, of the great, shimmering arch of the Milky Way galaxy spilling across the sky. But there was one image that remained elusive. The crown jewel. The one shot he had dreamed of for years, a perfect, frame-filling, soul-stirring photograph of the Aurora Borealis. After months of meticulous research, poring over solar activity charts, weather patterns, and topographical maps, he chose his location. Boreal Rim National Park. Even the name resonated with the sense of finality. It was a place spoken of in hushed, almost reverent tones by the most serious of outdoorsmen and photographers. Located in a remote, almost forgotten stretch of northern Alaska, it was deliberately kept wild. This was not a park for casual tourists looking for a scenic drive. There were no paved roads winding to picturesque overlooks. There were no cozy lodges with roaring fires and hot chocolate. There was a single point of entry, a single ranger station. And beyond that checkpoint lay hundreds of thousands of acres of unforgiving taiga forest, jagged, ice-scoured peaks, and vast, frozen lakes. For Alex's purpose, it was perfect. He planned his expedition for late October. The tourist season, what little there was of it, had long since passed. The first deep freezes had set in, locking the landscape in a hard, crystalline stillness. He knew he would have the park, and more importantly, the sky, almost entirely to himself. Solitude was a key ingredient for the kind of work he did. He spared no expense in his preparation. He spent a small fortune on expedition-grade equipment. A four-season tent, engineered to withstand gale-force winds and heavy snow. A sub-zero sleeping bag rated for temperatures that could kill an unprepared man in his sleep. Layers of specialized thermal clothing, from base layers that wicked away sweat to an outer shell of down and Gore-Tex that felt like wearing a personal fortress against the cold. And of course, his camera equipment. Each lens, each camera body, was a precision instrument, and he packed them with the care of a surgeon, nestled in weatherproof, impact-resistant cases. The journey itself was a process of peeling away the layers of the modern world. After landing in Anchorage, he drove for 2 full days. The asphalt highways gave way to cracked pavement, which soon degraded into loose gravel roads that rattled the frame of his rented 4x4. Finally, he turned onto the last stretch, a deeply rutted dirt track, more mud and ice than road, that wound its way through endless forests of black spruce and skeletal, white-barked birch. The ranger station was little more than a sturdy log cabin, looking as though it had grown out of the earth itself. A plume of wood smoke rose from a stone chimney, a lonely banner of human presence in a vast, silent land. The man who greeted him inside was named Miller. He was a man who seemed to have been shaped by the landscape he inhabited. He was wiry and tough, with a face that looked like it had been carved from old hickory, deeply lined by sun and wind and cold. His eyes, a pair of startlingly pale blue chips, were sharp and missed nothing. They swept over Alex, his gear, and the confidence in his posture with a single, appraising glance. Miller took Alex's permit and his meticulously detailed backcountry plan and reviewed them with a slow, methodical deliberation that bordered on ritual. He traced Alex's planned route on a large map tacked to the wall, his calloused fingers stopping at a particular point. Going out to Glacier's Toothridge, huh? Miller's voice was a low rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. It was a voice that didn't waste words. It's a good spot. Best in the park. Clear view to the north. Unobstructed. He paused, looking up from the map to meet Alex's eyes. You'll be alone out there. Truly alone. Alex felt a thrill of anticipation, the familiar hum of excitement that always came before a deep country trek. He smiled. That's the idea, he said. Miller nodded slowly, his gaze drifting past Alex, towards the single window that looked out on the endless expanse of trees. A strange, unreadable expression softened the hard lines of his face for a moment. The sky puts on a show up here, he said, his voice softer now. Grandest one you'll ever see. Nothing like it on Earth. He paused again, and the silence stretched. The strange expression returned, a shadow of something that wasn't quite reverence, but something closer to caution. Just be aware, he continued, his tone shifting, becoming heavier. Sometimes it asks for a little too much attention. Alex frowned slightly, unsure how to interpret the odd phrasing. Miller saw his confusion and clarified, though his clarification only deepened the mystery. Gets inside your head, he said, tapping his own temple with the leathery finger. If you let it. Alex, a man of science and logistics, categorized the statement as simple, old-timers' folksy wisdom, a poetic way of describing the awe-inspiring, overwhelming nature of the Aurora. He gave a polite, confident nod. I'll keep my wits about me. See that you do, Miller said, and his tone was suddenly flat, all poetry gone. It was an order, not a suggestion. He picked up a heavy rubber stamp and brought it down on Alex's permit with a solid, final thought. Check in on your satellite phone every 48 hours. Standard procedure. If we don't hear from you after 72, we start looking. He pushed the permit across the counter. But understand, son, this time of year in this place looking is a slow business. Very slow. The warning, though standard backcountry protocol, hung in the air of the small, warm cabin with an unusual weight. But Alex's mind was already on the trail. He was too focused on his goal, too full of purpose, to give the ranger's strange words any more thought than they seemed to deserve. He thanked Miller, shouldered his heavy pack, the familiar, comforting weight of self-sufficiency, and stepped out of the cabin, back into the crisp, cold air. He set off down the trail, a clearly marked path that he knew would eventually fade into little more than a suggestion in the wilderness beyond. The first day of the hike was everything he had hoped for and more. It was arduous, challenging, but deeply rewarding. The air was thin and sharp and tasted of pine needles and impending frost. The silence was absolute, a living presence broken only by the rhythmic crunch of his boots on the frozen earth, the whisper of the wind in the high branches, and the occasional, lonely cry of a raven echoing across the valley. He felt the accumulated stress of cities, of deadlines, of traffic and noise, sloughing off with every step he took. This was his sanctuary, his church. The profound solitude, the raw and untamed power of the landscape, it didn't make him feel small, it made him feel focused. It centered him. He made camp in the late afternoon, selecting a spot with practiced ease. It was in a sheltered grove of trees, just below the exposed, windswept crest of Glacier's Toothridge. He was efficient, a blur of practiced motion. The tent was up and staked down in minutes. His sleeping system, the insulated pad, and the high loft down bag was laid out. His small stove was soon purring contentedly, its tiny blue flame melting a pot of snow for water. As dusk began to bleed across the western sky in stunning shades of bruised purple and cold, liquid orange, he sat on a small camp stool, sipping hot, sweet tea from a thermos. His breath plumed in the frigid air. He felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace. He had done everything right. He was prepared. He was skilled. He was exactly where he had spent years dreaming of being. He had come to the edge of the world to find and capture the light. He had no way of knowing that something in the light had been waiting for him to arrive. When the last trace of the sun had been extinguished below the horizon, the cold came down like a hammer. It was not a gradual cooling, but a sudden, physical presence, a weight that pressed in from all sides, seeking out any weakness in Alex's layers of protection. The temperature plummeted, and the world was reduced to stark, two-dimensional silhouettes under a canopy of impossibly bright, diamond-hearted stars. It was the kind of pristine, profound night sky you can only find in the deepest, coldest wilderness, a sky utterly free from the polluting glow of human civilization. Alex, bundled in so many layers of down and wool that he felt like a visitor in his own body, sat in a simple camp chair just outside the thin nylon wall of his tent. His camera, a complex and beautiful assembly of metal and glass, was mounted on its heavy carbon fiber tripod, its lens aimed patiently and expectantly at the northern horizon. He sipped hot, sweet tea from a thermos, the steam instantly crystallizing in the frigid air, his own breath pluming in a thick white cloud with every exhale. He was waiting. The solar forecast had promised a strong geomagnetic storm. All the dials of science and probability were turned in his favor. He felt a quiet, focused excitement, the calm before the creative storm. The intense cold didn't bother him. It was a part of the experience, a necessary price for the absolute clarity of the air, for the purity of the coming spectacle. And then, around 11 o'clock, it began. It started as it always does, a promise whispered across the firmament. A faint, greenish-white shimmer on the northern horizon, so subtle at first that he almost thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. It looked like a distant veil of the finest silk being draped over the mountains, or smoke catching some unseen light from a city that he knew for a fact did not exist for 1,000 miles. Alex's heart, which had been beating in a slow, steady rhythm, quickened its pace. This was it. With the practiced, economical movements of a professional, his gloved fingers nimble despite the intense cold, he began adjusting his camera settings aperture, ISO, shutter speed, dialing them in from muscle memory. The shimmer grew. It brightened, gathering strength from some unseen source, and began its slow, celestial dance. The classic, ethereal green of the aurora started to rise from behind the jagged black teeth of the distant mountain range. It formed into vast, silent curtains of light that swayed and pulsed as if to a rhythm he couldn't hear. It was beautiful, utterly, breathtakingly beautiful. It was the kind of sight that makes you feel the true, awesome scale of the universe and your own fleeting, insignificant place within it. Alex began shooting, the quiet, satisfying click of his camera's shutter the only man-made sound in the entire landscape. He took several long exposure shots, his professional eye already at work, critiquing the composition, the sharpness of the focus on the stars, the delicate play of green light on the snow-dusted peaks in the foreground. He felt a surge of triumph. This was the shot. This was why he had come. But then, something changed. It was a subtle shift at first, an insidious alteration at the very edges of the great green curtain. A new color began to bleed into the display. This was not the pale, soft pink or the gentle, fleeting violet that can sometimes appear at the fringes of a particularly powerful solar storm. No, this was a deep, bruised magenta. A violent, unhealthy purple that looked less like light and more like a contamination. It swirled into the serene green not like a painter's brushstroke adding a new, harmonious color to a canvas, but like a disease, a corruption spreading through living tissue. Alex lowered his camera, his eye no longer pressed to the viewfinder. He stood up from his chair, a deep frown forming between his brows. He had studied aurora photography for years. He'd seen thousands of photographs, watched countless time-lapse videos, read scientific papers on the atmospheric chemistry that creates the spectacle. He had never seen a color like that. It was too saturated, too aggressive. It felt viscerally wrong. And then another color appeared, and the wrongness intensified tenfold. From the highest point of the auroral arc, a slick, oily crimson, the color of old, dried blood, began to drip downwards. It didn't dance. It didn't shimmer. It oozed. It moved like a liquid, a malevolent stain spreading across the heavens, its thick tendrils descending with a slow, deliberate, predatory purpose. The sense of awe Alex had felt just moments before was rapidly being replaced by a profound and chilling unease. A cold dread that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't right. His logical mind, the mind of a photographer and a technician, scrambled for an explanation. A unique combination of atmospheric gases at an unusual altitude? A rare type of solar particle event he'd never read about? A trick of his own eyes, perhaps, some strange optical illusion caused by the extreme cold and the altitude? He raised his camera again, driven by the lifelong instinct to document, to capture this bizarre, unsettling anomaly. And that is when he heard it for the first time. It was not a sound that traveled through the air to his ears. It was a pressure. A low, subaudible hum that seemed to resonate directly inside his skull, a physical vibration in the delicate bones behind his ears. He shook his head sharply, a reflexive action, thinking it was the onset of altitude sickness, or perhaps just the sound of his own blood pounding in his ears from the cold and exertion. He pressed the heels of his hands hard against his ears, trying to block it out, but it made no difference at all. The sound wasn't coming from outside. The sound was inside him. And woven into that low, pervasive hum was something else. Something that made the fine hairs on his arms and the back of his neck stand on end with the primal fear. It was a faint, sibilant whisper. It sounded like wind rustling through dry pine needles or sand skittering across rock, but it had a cadence, a distinct rhythm that suggested intelligence. It was shapeless. The words, if they were words, were meaningless, like listening to a hushed, urgent conversation in a language that had never been spoken by a human tongue, from a room far, far away. SHHHH Caliph SHHHH. He spun around in his chair, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs with a painful, frantic force. His headlamp, strapped to his forehead, sliced a brilliant white cone through the darkness, illuminating the silent, snow-dusted trees that ringed his campsite. Nothing. The world was perfectly, unnaturally still. The only movement was the grotesque, technicolor light show unfolding in the sky above him. As if his attention were a trigger, a third color joined the spectacle. A yellow so sour and bilious it made him feel physically nauseous. It pulsed in sickening, sickly waves, a jaundiced tide washing through the bloody crimson and the bruised magenta. The sky was no longer a canvas of natural beauty. It was a wound, a festering, cosmic wound torn open above the world. And with the arrival of the yellow light, the whispering grew slightly louder, intertwining with the nauseating pulses of color. It still wasn't forming words he could understand, but as he stared, mesmerized in horror, Alex felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of profound despair wash over him. A deep, gut-wrenching sorrow for things he hadn't consciously thought about in years. A failed relationship from a decade past. A missed career opportunity. The sterile, quiet memory of his grandfather's hospital room. The emotions were raw, powerful, and utterly overwhelming. And they weren't his own. They didn't bubble up from within. They felt injected, pushed into his mind from the outside. He scrambled backwards, stumbling away from his camera and tripod, his hands shaking so badly he could barely work the zipper on his tent. He fumbled with it for a few agonizing seconds before ripping it open and throwing himself inside. He zipped it shut, plunging himself into the small, enclosed darkness, as if the thin, fragile layer of nylon could possibly protect him from the sky itself. He squeezed his eyes shut, but it was no use. The impossible, diseased colors seemed to burn straight through his eyelids, staining the inside of his vision with their wrongness. And the whispering was still there, a faint, insidious murmur at the very edge of his hearing, a constant presence inside his head. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. He lay there in his high-tech sleeping bag, a man who had intentionally sought out the most profound solitude on the continent, now more terrified by the vast, empty space around him than he had ever been in his life. He had come to the wilderness to feel small in the face of nature's grandeur. Instead, he felt like an insect under a microscope, pinned and scrutinized by an intelligence that was utterly alien and deeply, profoundly unwell. He lay there for hours, rigid with fear, waiting for the sun, praying for the light. The true light. The one that didn't whisper back. Dawn arrived not as a gentle reprieve, but as a pale, exhausted surrender. The sky did not brighten. It simply turned a flat, featureless, unforgiving gray. The oppressive, malevolent colors of the night finally receded, not fading gracefully, but seemingly retreating, withdrawing into some unseen abyss beyond the visible spectrum. Alex eventually crawled out of his tent. He felt haggard, unrest, his body thrumming with a low-level anxiety, the chemical residue of hours of sustained terror. He stood up, his joints aching from the cold and the tension, and looked at the world. It was stubbornly, maddeningly normal. The snow was white. The gnarled trunks of the spruce trees were black. The air was just cold, sharp, and clean in his lungs. There were no whispers, no hums, no impossible colors staining the landscape. And in the flat, gray light of morning, he felt like a fool. His rational mind, the part of him that had successfully navigated treacherous landscapes and complex logistics for years, reasserted its control. It had to be a hallucination. A perfect storm of psychological and physiological factors. The extreme solitude. The sensory deprivation of the profound silence, which can cause the brain to create its own sounds. The exhaustion from the long journey and the hike. The altitude, which can play tricks on perception. Hypnagogia. That was the clinical word he clung to. A state between wakefulness and sleep where vivid, dreamlike hallucinations can occur. He had simply been overtired, and his brain, primed with the expectation of seeing a spectacular light show, had played a cruel trick on him. The whispering? Tinnitus, amplified by the oppressive silence. The colors? A rare atmospheric event, a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon he had been lucky to witness, his tired mind merely misinterpreting its uniqueness as something sinister. He clung to these rational explanations like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood in a vast, cold ocean. He spent the day deliberately forcing a sense of normalcy, performing the familiar rituals of camp life as a bulwark against the memory of the night. He made a hot, calorie-rich breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, the familiar actions of comfort. He methodically checked his gear, tightening a loose strap on his pack, cleaning his stove's fuel line. He decided to take a short hike, to scout the length of Glacier's Tooth Ridge and clear his head, leaving his main camp set up as a base. The physical exertion helped. The simple act of putting one foot in front of the other, of feeling the burn in his muscles and the cold air on his face, was grounding. With the sun, weak and distant as it was, casting a pale light on the landscape, the terror of the night began to feel distant, unreal, like the memory of a particularly vivid nightmare. He felt his confidence return. He was Alex, the professional photographer. He was in control. But the evidence of his supposed madness was waiting for him, stored silently on a small, black square of plastic and silicon in his camera. Back at his tent in the mid-afternoon, as the light already began to fade, he decided he had to know for sure. He needed to see if he had captured what he thought he'd seen. He needed to prove to himself that it was a figment of his imagination. He picked up the camera, his heart beating a little faster now, a nervous tremor in his hands. He switched it on, the small LCD screen glowing to life. He cycled through the first few shots he had taken. The ones from the beginning of the display. They were perfect. The aurora was a placid, beautiful river of green light, captured in stunning clarity. The stars were sharp points of light. The composition was excellent. He felt a moment of relief. See? It was all fine. Then he clicked to the next image. And the one after that. His blood ran cold. The screen glowed with the same diseased, sickening colors that had been burned into his memory. The bruised magenta, the bleeding crimson, the jaundiced, nauseating yellow. They were all there, sharp and undeniable in the raw data of the photograph. It was not a hallucination. It was not a dream. It was real. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't the detail that made a choked gasp escape his throat. He zoomed in on one of the photos, a wide shot of the sky over the dark tree lane at the edge of his camp. His professional-grade camera, with its incredibly sensitive sensor, was designed to pull detail out of deep shadows. And in the digital noise of the underexposed foreground, in the deep blackness between the tree trunks, his camera had picked up things his own eyes had not. There were shapes. They were faint, distorted, and horrifyingly elongated. They were not animals. They were too tall, too thin, their limbs impossibly long and spindly. They seemed to be peering out from behind the trees, half hidden, their forms blending with the shadows. And in the place where a face should be, there was only a swirl of darkness, a suggestion of a hungry void. He dropped the camera in the snow. The feeling of being watched, which he had dismissed as paranoia, came rushing back with nauseating, absolute force. They hadn't just been in the sky. They had been in the trees, watching him. He immediately abandoned all pretense of calm. He scrambled to pack a small day bag, water, a high-energy food bar, his GPS, and his satellite phone. He needed to contact Ranger Miller. This was beyond his experience, beyond any protocol he knew. His check-in wasn't due until the next day, but he couldn't wait. Not now. He scrambled up to the highest, most exposed point of the ridge, where he knew the signal would be strongest. The wind was sharper here, cutting through his layers. He powered on the phone. The small screen lit up. Searching for satellite, the progress bar filled with agonizing slowness, each second stretching into an eternity. Finally, it connected. A wave of profound relief washed over him. He was reconnected to the human world. He dialed the ranger station number from his permit. The phone rang once, twice. Then, a click of connection. But it wasn't Miller's rumbling, gravelly voice that answered. It was static. A harsh, digital, electronic hiss. And underneath the static, impossibly, was the whispering. It was clearer now than it had been in the open air, sharpened and amplified by the electronics. It was still a language he couldn't recognize, but the cadence was more distinct, the sibilant sounds more defined. And this time, woven into the fabric of the alien phonetics, was a single, perfectly clear English word. A name. A name he hadn't spoken aloud in 15 years. SHHHH Sarakaleth SHHV tagged Sarah. Alex's entire world collapsed in that moment. Sarah had been his college girlfriend. The woman he was going to marry. The woman who had died in a violent car accident on a rain-slicked highway a decade and a half ago. It was a grief he had buried so deep he rarely felt its edges anymore. A wound he never showed to the world. A secret part of his own personal history. How? How could it know that name? He screamed in a mixture of frustration and pure terror, dropping the phone onto the frozen rock. He snatched it up again, his hands shaking violently. Miller? Is anyone there? Can you hear me? The only reply was the crackling static, the insidious whispers, and that one, soul-shredding name, repeated over and over again, a needle of sound pushed directly into the most painful part of his memory. The sound wasn't just coming from the phone's tiny speaker. In his panicked state, it felt like it was coming from the air around him, from the trees, from the very rocks beneath his feet. His carefully constructed rationality didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was not altitude sickness. He was in the presence of something sentient. Something that could see into his mind, pluck out his deepest, most guarded pains, and whisper them back to him on a bed of static. Blind panic took hold. He had to get out. Not tomorrow morning. Not in an hour. Now. He half ran, half stumbled back towards the relative safety of his campsite. He wouldn't wait for morning and the safety of daylight. He would pack his essential gear and hike through the night. The thought of spending another night under that thing was infinitely more terrifying than the thought of navigating the treacherous, lightless trail back to the ranger station. As he frantically began stuffing his sleeping bag into its compression sack, a glint of metal under the low-hanging branches of a nearby pine tree caught his eye. It was half buried in the snow and fallen needles, something old and out of place. Curiosity, or perhaps a desperate, primal need for any distraction from the escalating horror, made him stop what he was doing and go over to it. He kicked away the snow. It was an old, metal-banded footlocker, the kind used for scientific expeditions decades ago. It was rusted and heavily dented, but the latches, though stiff with age and corrosion, were not locked. With a grunt of effort, he pried it open. The hinges screamed in protest. Inside, protected from the worst of the elements by a decaying, yellowed oilcloth, was a thick, leather-bound journal. He knew he should be packing. He knew he should be running for his life. But a powerful, morbid compulsion, a need for answers, made him pick it up and open it. The first page was written in a neat, clinical, scientific hand. Property of Dr. Eris Thorne. U.S. Geological Survey. Boreal Rim Wilderness Expedition. September 1978. Alex's fear, which he thought could not possibly get any worse, was suddenly joined by a new, chilling realization that dropped the temperature of his blood even further. He was not the first. Alex huddled inside his tent. The idea of a desperate night hike had evaporated, replaced by a paralyzing, morbid curiosity. The last weak rays of the dying sun offered no comfort, serving only as a countdown to the return of the colored sky. He was a prisoner in his own camp, and his only companion against the encroaching dark was the voice of a man dead for 40 years. He switched on his headlamp, the bright white beam illuminating the yellowed pages of the journal, and he began to read. The words of Dr. Eris Thorne, written in a neat, disciplined, scientific hand, began as you would expect. The first several entries were dry and clinical, filled with observations about rock strata, magnetic field readings, and minor seismic activity. Thorne and his partner, a man named Jennings, were part of a small, two-man team from the U.S. Geological Survey, tasked with studying the park's unique and intense magnetic anomalies. For weeks, the journal entries were routine, a chronicle of methodical scientific work in a remote location. Then, the tone began to shift. The clinical detachment began to fray at the edges, replaced by a subtle note of confusion, and then, of alarm. Journal entry, October 12, 1978. Extraordinary auroral display last night. Far more intense than the baseline predictions for current solar activity should allow. But the intensity was not the most remarkable aspect. The colors were anomalous. Standard spectrographic analysis is proving insufficient. There were persistent, high-saturation emission lines in the deep violet and crimson spectrums that do not correspond to any known atmospheric gas interaction at any plausible altitude. It's almost as if the light itself is composed of something other than excited nitrogen and oxygen atoms. My partner, Jennings, is convinced it's faulty equipment, a calibration error in the spectrometer. I'm not so sure. There was a quality to the light, a vibrancy that felt almost biological. Alex's hands trembled as he held the journal. Anomalous colors. Biological. Thorne had not only seen it, he had tried to measure it. He had applied the lens of science to it and found it wanting. Alex read on, his breath catching in his throat, the words on the page a terrifying echo of his own experience. Journal entry, October 14, 1978. Another display tonight. The anomalous colors were dominant, almost completely washing out the typical green. Jennings is now complaining of persistent headaches and what he describes as mild auditory hallucinations. His words were a high-frequency whisper, like gas escaping a faulty valve. I have experienced it as well. A distinct, sibilant pattern that seems to perfectly synchronize with the pulses of crimson light. We have checked our radio equipment. It is not a source of interference. More troubling, the sound is not being picked up by any of our sensitive audio recording devices. The only conclusion, however improbable, is that it is being perceived directly by the brain. A troubling hypothesis presents itself. Is the light itself a medium for a signal? Is it somehow projecting or inducing the perception of sound? The parallels were no longer just similar, they were terrifyingly exact. Alex felt a strange and horrible kinship with this long-dead scientist, a shared terror that stretched across 4 decades of cold, silent winters. He flipped through the pages, the entries becoming more frequent now, the neat handwriting growing more hurried, more erratic, the pressure of the pen increasing. Journal entry, October 19, 1978. Jennings is unwell. Severely. He spent all of last night sitting outside the cabin, staring up at the sky, completely unresponsive to my calls. His eyes were wide, but unfocused. He claims the lights are singing to him. When I tried to persuade him to come inside, he became agitated, almost violent. He shouted at me, said I was interrupting the choir. I had to sedate him with a shot from our medical kit. I am now certain that we are not observing a simple play of light. This is a phenomenon of active, directed intelligence. It is not broadcasting randomly. It is reading us. Last night, the whispers in my own mind, for a fraction of a second, formed a word. Patches. The name of the dog I had as a child, a name I have not thought of in 30 years. How? By what mechanism can light waves access latent memory? Is it modulating the local magnetic field? Directly stimulating the neural pathways? The implications are staggering and utterly horrifying. The phrase, interrupting the choir, sent a fresh shiver down Alex's spine. It was so chillingly close to what Ranger Miller had said about the sky's show. He kept reading, the journal now transforming from a scientific log into a desperate chronicle of 2 minds disintegrating under an impossible, alien pressure. Journal entry, October 22, 1978. I have locked myself in the cabin. Jennings is gone. He seemed calm this morning, but it was a ruse. He waited until the light storm began 2 nights ago, then simply walked out into the woods, towards the ridge. He did not take a coat or any supplies. He did not return. I can't look for him. I can't go outside when it's dark. The colors are there even when I close my eyes now. The whispers are constant. They are not just whispers anymore. They are promises. It offers me things. Knowledge. It shows me images in my mind, the secrets of star formation, the elegant, terrifying mathematics of black holes, the true composition of dark matter. It presents these things as beautiful, complex geometric patterns that shift and evolve. It is a lure, a siren song composed of exotic particles and radiation. It wants access. It wants a foothold in a consciousness. It presents itself as a symphony, a choir, but I know what it is. It's a predator, a consciousness that wears light as its skin. Journal entry, October 25, 1978. The radio is dead. Or rather, it has been co-opted. It just whispers now. I try to use it to call for help, and it laughed at me. A sound made of static and human grief. It knows my fears. It knows I am afraid of being alone, of dying out here, forgotten by the world. It taunts me with visions of my own decaying body being found in the spring. I smashed the radio against the wall. It didn't help. The voice is in my head now. It doesn't need a medium anymore. It has found a resonance. It has tuned itself to my mind, to my specific neurofrequency. The final entry was a barely legible scrawl, spread across a full page. The pen strokes were deep and frantic, tearing into the paper in places, the ink smudged by a trembling hand. Journal entry, date unknown. Can't remember how long. The sun is a mercy, but it's getting shorter every day. The nights are so long now. So long. It calls itself the luminous choir. It sings the song of entropy, the song of the unmaking of things. It has shown me what it is. Not from here. Not from this galaxy. It's a thought. A vast, ancient, shipwrecked thought that drifted through the void for eons and snagged on our planet's magnetic field, like a ship running aground on a hidden reef. It's trapped here. And it's lonely. And it's hungry. It feeds on consciousness. It draws you in with the beauty, the colors, and then it deciphers you. And then it consumes you. It doesn't eat your body. It eats your memories, your hopes, your fears, your loves. It digests your soul and leaves an empty, walking shell behind. Jennings wasn't the first. The old ranger back at the station, he tried to warn us. He called it sky sickness. The local tribes, his grandmother told him, had a name for it. They called it the whisperer that wears the rainbow. They never went out at night in the deep winter. They knew. We didn't listen. It's singing for me now. A special song. Just for me. It's so beautiful. I think I will go outside now. I need to see it up close. I need to join the choir. Alex slammed the journal shut. His blood felt like ice in his veins. The luminous choir. It had a name. And it had a purpose. It wasn't just observing. It was hunting. And he, Alex, was its new captive audience. As if on cue, summoned by the very act of reading its name, the first, faint, unhealthy colors began to stain the deepening twilight sky. The bruised magenta. The bleeding crimson. And from the very air around him, no longer faint, the whispering began again. This time, it was intimate, as if a voice was speaking directly into the shell of his ear. And it had learned. Alex, the lonely photographer, we saw you coming, we have a song for you, too. The voice was no longer a shapeless, sibilant hiss. It was a chorus of voices, layered and discordant, yet the words were crystal clear. It was speaking English. It had learned from him. It had learned from Thorn. It had learned from God knows how many others. Terror, pure and absolute, seized him. Thorn's journal was not a historical record. It was not a warning. It was a prophecy. And it was his turn. There is a point where fear transcends thought. It ceases to be an emotion and becomes a physical, primal force, a lightning strike to the nervous system that bypasses all logic, all reason, all training. It is the purest state of survival instinct. Alex hit that point the moment the choir spoke his name. He was no longer a photographer. He was no longer a hiker or an outdoorsman. In the grand, indifferent theater of the wilderness, he had been recast as the prey. He burst out of the tent, a raw scream tearing from his throat. He left the journal lying open on his sleeping bag. He left his expensive pack, his food, his stove. He left everything but the clothes on his back and the headlamp strapped to his forehead. His entire consciousness, his entire being, was consumed by a single, overriding command. Run. The moment he cleared the tent flap, the sky exploded. It was no longer a distant curtain of light hanging politely on the northern horizon. It descended. The aurora swirled and writhed directly overhead, a churning, atmospheric malevolence. It was a maelstrom of sentient poison. The crimson, the magenta, and the jaundiced yellow churned together in a violent vortex, and at the very center of the storm, a new color appeared. An impossible shade of violet black, a color that seemed to drink the very light around it, a hole in the fabric of the sky. It felt like he was staring into the dilated, unblinking iris of a cosmic, insane god. And the whispers became a roar. It was a cacophony of layered voices, thousands of them, all speaking at once, yet all focused with laser-like precision on him. You can't run from us, Alex. We are the sky. We are the space between the trees. We are the silence in your ears. We know what you see when you close your eyes at night. The twisted metal. The broken glass. The flashing red and blue lights on her face. It wasn't your fault, Alex, but you could have been there. A part of you wishes you had been there, doesn't it? Images, unbidden and horrifically vivid, flashed behind his eyes, projected onto his optic nerves by an unseen hand. The mangled wreck of Sarah's car, A scene he had only ever witnessed in grainy police photos was now rendered in brutal, high-definition detail by the choir. He could smell the gasoline and the rain. He stumbled onto the trail, his headlamp beam cutting a frantic, bouncing path through the suffocating darkness. The trees on either side of him were no longer just trees. In the sickening, colored light from above, their branches seemed to writhe and twist like tentacles, their gnarled trunks contorting into gaunt, screaming faces. He knew it wasn't a hallucination painted by the light and his own terror, but the knowledge did nothing to stop the overwhelming, visceral horror. Your father was so proud of you. Did you know that? He kept all your photographs in a special album. But you never called him back that day. He sat by the phone, waiting. He died thinking you were too busy for him. He died alone, Alex. Alone. He cried out, a raw, wounded sound of pure anguish, and clapped his hands hard over his ears. It was useless. The voices were not sound waves. They were inside his skull, a symphony composed of his own deepest failures and griefs, conducted by a malevolent intelligence from the stars. He ran, heedless of the terrain, his only guide the faint ribbon of the trail. His lungs burned with the frigid air, his legs screamed in protest, but he couldn't stop. To stop was to be caught. To be caught was to be consumed. A hidden tree root snagged his boot, and he went down hard, crashing onto the frozen, unforgiving ground. The impact sent a shockwave up his body, and his headlamp, striking a rock, flickered once and died. He was plunged into a surreal, colored darkness. The only light came from the horrific aurora above, painting the snow around him in shifting, hellish shades of blood and bile. And in the sudden, electronic silence of his dead headlamp, the voices grew louder, more intimate, more seductive. Give up. It's so much easier. Let go. Thorne gave up. Jennings gave up. They are with us now. Their little sparks of memory, their griefs and joys, are so sweet. We can make the pain go away, Alex. All of it. The guilt. The sorrow. Just look up. Look at us. Let us in. We can show you everything. The temptation was insidious, a seductive poison whispered into the core of his exhaustion. For a split second, the thought of release, of an end to the fear and the running and the grief that had haunted him his whole life, was overwhelmingly alluring. He felt his head start to tilt upwards, his neck muscles relaxing, his will beginning to crumble. And then a different voice cut through the chaos. Not an alien one, but a memory. The gruff, gravelly voice of Ranger Miller back at the station. Sometimes, it asked for a little too much attention. And that memory triggered another. His own father, years and years ago, teaching him how to use a compass in the woods behind their house. If you're ever truly lost, son, don't look up at the sky. Don't trust the stars you don't know. Look down. Trust the ground beneath your feet. The ground doesn't lie. The sky can. Trust the ground. With a surge of adrenaline born of pure defiance, Alex pushed himself up. He would not look up. He would not give the choir his attention. He would deny it the one thing it craved. He fixed his gaze on the trail, a faint, pale ribbon in the unholy light, just a few feet in front of his boots. He began to run again, this time with a desperate, focused purpose. He poured every ounce of his remaining will into a single, frantic task, blocking out the voices. He had to fill the space in his own mind before it could. He started reciting anything he could think of, shouting the words into the freezing air. A, B, C, D, E, he chanted, his voice hoarse and cracking. Such a small mind. The choir sneered, its collective voice dripping with an ancient, cosmic contempt. Such a simple little song. We can give you the music of the spheres. FGH hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, he gasped, switching tactics, his mind grasping for the structure of science. He ran and he chanted, his own voice a pathetic but defiant mantra against the psychic onslaught. The forest itself seemed to warp around him. A tree branch, looking like a skeletal arm, lashed out and caught him across the face, the sharp twig drawing blood. The trail seemed to twist back on itself, the same gnarled tree appearing again and again. He felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if the very geography of the park was being rewritten around him by the will of the light. He didn't know how long he ran. It could have been minutes or it could have been hours. His world was reduced to the next footstep, the next letter, the next element. He was a machine, running on nothing but pure, unadulterated will to survive. Then, through the dark trunks of the trees, he saw another light. Not a swirling, sickly, colored light. A steady light. A yellow, artificial, rectangular light. A window. The ranger station. The sight of it, the simple, beautiful geometry of a window frame, broke the choir's hold on his senses for a fraction of a second. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through him. He screamed, a wordless cry for help that was all air and desperation, and poured the very last of his strength into a final, stumbling sprint. The whispering voices rose to a final, deafening crescendo of pure rage and frustration. You cannot leave us. We own this sky. We own you. The ground in front of him, just feet from the cabin's porch, seemed to liquefy. The snow and frozen earth dissolved into a swirling vortex of the same violet blackness he had seen in the center of the aurora. He didn't hesitate. He leaped, his tired muscles screaming in protest, clearing the phantom abyss by inches, and crashed with his full body weight against the solid oak of the ranger station's door, pounding on it with his bloody, frozen fists. "Help! Miller! Let me in!" The door was thrown open. Light warm, normal, beautiful, yellow incandescent light spilled out, pushing back the colored gloom. Ranger Miller stood there, a heavy 12-gauge shotgun held loosely in his hands, his face a grim mask of stone. He didn't ask questions. He grabbed Alex by the front of his jacket and hauled him inside, then slammed the heavy oak door shut behind him. The solid thump of the door closing was followed by the loud, metallic clack of a heavy deadbolt being thrown. The moment the bolt shot home, the voices stopped. They didn't fade away. They were severed, instantly cut off, as if a switch had been flipped. The silence that fell was so total, so absolute. It was as loud and overwhelming as the screaming had been. Alex collapsed onto the rough-hewn wooden floor, shaking and sobbing, a broken man washed up on the shore of a nightmare. Alex remained on the floor of the ranger station for a long time, curled in on himself, the raw, racking sobs slowly subsiding into ragged, hitching breaths. The warmth from a cast-iron wood stove in the corner began to seep into his frozen, battered body, a simple, physical comfort that felt like a lifeline. He could feel the solid, unmoving floorboards beneath him, a stark contrast to the shifting, treacherous ground of the forest. He was safe. The thought was so profound, so overwhelming, it was almost painful. Ranger Miller didn't press him. He didn't ask what had happened, didn't bombard him with questions. He simply stood watch, the shotgun now resting in the crook of his arm, his pale blue eyes fixed on the heavy oak door as if he expected it to be torn from its very hinges. He moved only once, to walk over to the cabin's single window and ensure that the thick, heavy blackout curtain was drawn completely shut, leaving not even a sliver of the outside world visible. Finally, after what felt like an hour, Alex managed to push himself into a sitting position, his back against the rough-hewn log wall. He looked up at the old ranger. Miller's face, in the warm, steady lamplight, was etched with a profound, ancient weariness. There was no surprise in his eyes. There was no disbelief. There was only a deep, sorrowful recognition. A look that said, "I have seen this before." "You heard them, didn't you, son?" Miller's voice was soft, gentle, almost a whisper itself, but this was a human whisper, full of pity. The songs. Alex, his throat raw and constricted, could only manage a single, shuddering nod. "It gets hungry this time of year," Miller continued, his gaze drifting from the door to the curtain window. He spoke as if describing a natural, predictable cycle, like the migration of caribou or the freezing of the lakes. "When the nights get long and the magnetic field gets thin in places. It's been here longer than the trees, longer than the mountains. It's part of the place." "Thorn," Alex finally croaked, the name a painful rasp. "The geologist from 1978. His journal." Miller's face tightened, a flicker of old pain in his eyes. "We found his camp the next spring after the thaw. The footlocker with the journal was all that was left of him. They never found Thorn. Never found his partner, Jennings." He let out a heavy, rattling sigh. "The official report says they got lost in a blizzard, succumbed to exposure. It's cleaner that way. But the men who had to sign that report we know better." He walked over to the stove and stoked the fire, the metallic scrape of the poker loud in the quiet room. "I read that journal, cover to cover, more times than I can count. That's why I have the rules. The 48-hour check-ins. The blackout curtains on my own windows. That's why I try to warn people, with those stupid, folksy sayings of mine." He looked at Alex, his expression one of utter helplessness. "But you can't explain a thing like that. You can't tell a man of science that the sky will try to eat his soul. You can only hope he's strong enough to turn away when it starts paying attention to him." Alex spent the night on a simple cot by the fire. He did not sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of impossible colors, after images burned onto the inside of his eyelids. He could still feel the phantom pressure of the whispers at the very edge of his hearing, a permanent tinnitus of the soul. A scar on the silence. The next morning, under a sky of indifferent, neutral gray, Miller drove him out. They traveled in the ranger's old, beaten-up truck, down the same rutted, frozen track Alex had driven up with such hope and excitement just days before. Neither of them spoke much. There was nothing left to say. The experience was a chasm between them and the rest of the human race, a shared trauma that words could only cheapen. When they finally reached the point where the dirt track met the paved road, the border between the choir's territory and the mundane world, Miller stopped the truck. "Go home, son," he said, his gaze fixed forward, looking down the long, empty stretch of asphalt. "Try to forget this place. And if you can't forget it, then learn to live with it." He finally turned to look at Alex, his pale eyes deadly serious. "And stay out of the deep wilderness. Stay out of the quiet places. Some places are just wrong. They've been claimed by things that don't want us there. Things that were here long before we were, and will be here long after we're gone." Alex did go home, but the man who returned was not the same man who had left. He sold his backcountry gear, the tools of his trade and his passion, getting rid of it all in a single, frantic weekend. He sold his expensive camera equipment, the lenses, the tripods, the precision bodies. The thought of looking through a lens, of trying to capture and frame the natural world, of hunting for light, now filled him with a visceral, sickening dread. He moved. He left his quiet house near the mountains and relocated to the heart of a sprawling city. A place of perpetual, artificial light. A place where the sky is a permanent, hazy dome of orange, where you could live your entire life and never truly see the night sky. But it didn't help. The trauma of Boreal Rim was not in the place, it was in him now. It had become a part of his own internal landscape. He suffers, to this day, from severe, chronic insomnia and a debilitating, specific astrophobia, fear not just of storms, but of the stars and the celestial sky itself. He cannot look up at night. Even a clear, moonlit sky is enough to trigger a panic attack. He says that sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the city's hum dies down in the hours before dawn, if he listens hard enough, he can still hear it. A faint, sibilant whisper at the very edge of the silence. A reminder that it's still there, waiting, and hungry. He contacted us at the Wilderness Protocol because he wanted his story told. Not for fame, not for money, not even for belief. He wanted it told as a warning. The same way Dr. Thorne tried to warn the future with his journal. The same way Ranger Miller tries to warn the foolishly brave who come to his station. The wilderness holds wonders beyond our comprehension, but it also holds terrors that defy our sanity. We are a species drawn to light, taught to look up at the sky and wonder. But Alex's story is a chilling reminder of a forgotten, vital protocol. Sometimes, the safest thing you can do, the only thing you can do is look down, trust the solid ground beneath your feet, and run. Because some light is not meant for our eyes. And some songs are not meant for our minds. They are for the endless, hungry void between the stars, and we are nothing but brief, fleeting notes in their awful, ancient chorus. Thank you for joining us at the Wilderness Protocol. The world is full of strange and unexplained events, especially in its most remote corners. If you have encountered something in the wild that defies explanation, a story that needs to be told, we invite you to share it with us through the email address in the description below. If you found this account as chilling as we did, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more reports from the fringes of our map. Click the notification bell to ensure you never miss a protocol update. For now, stay safe, stay vigilant, and whatever you do, don't trust the lights.